Well, I mean, Grandma seems to like it. Cross your legs.
I knew it!
Welcome, compadres, to the nerdiest talk show on the internet. Hello, I'm Christian Michael Pearson. Welcome to my brand new series, Dork in Tinfoil, starring me. It's a show where I ponder life's nerdiest questions that nobody cares about. And today, as you saw from the complicated title, we are going to be discussing horror movies. Now, what exactly defines a horror movie besides cheap scares and that eerie sense that someone is watching you? I see you. Now, so today I'm going to be discussing what is the greatest era of horror films. I've divided them all up into 4 separate eras. Let's run them down. Let's start things off with the classical era of horror films. Now, it's kind of hard to figure out when horror films exactly started. It is most likely believed that it started in 1890 with some short horror films in France. And this era definitely brought in the universal monsters we've come to adore, such as Nosferatu, Frankenstein, and many others, even the Man, the Wolfman, that are still seen today and still trying to read off their fame. Just stop, Universal, here. It's not gonna work, man. And this stretched on for a long period of time, even obtaining the Hitchcockian era of films, with things such as The Birds and Psycho, which you saw a bit of the music earlier. This is an iconic piece of movie history because it really introduced new grounds that really explores our fears, something that not a lot of us wanted to do at that time. We use movies as an escape. Horror movies seem to be wanting us to draw into something worse. Now, it's kind of hard to discuss when exactly the classical era started, but it is easy to pinpoint exactly when it ended. I believe it ended in 1978 with the first ever Halloween movie, when we got introduced to our first ever slasher serial killer, Michael Myers. No, that's not groovy, baby. Get out. Not you. There we go. This brought in a new wave of horror films in the slasher era. Now, I know that there are a lot of films during this time that weren't exactly slasher films, such as The Thing, Ridley Scott's Alien, as well as Cronenberg's The Fly. A lot more artsy-fartsy cult classic types that are still studied in film schools. But let's be honest, during the time of the 80s to the early 90s, slasher films were what dominated the media. Creatures such as Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees began to be known as the kings of horror. This era of horror films focused more on the blood and the gore, ripping of human life. It shows how fragile it is and how easy it is to just... Sorry. A lot of people had a lot of fond memories of this era of horror films, as in the classical era we got a lot of just trying to figure out just what you can really scare people with, because it's easy to scare people back then because no one has seen anything like it. With this era, we got to learn to be scared of things that we didn't really need to know we need to be scared of. Especially falling asleep. Holy crap. However, the slasher era really seemed to end during the early 90s. In the 90s, we got sparked a new era of horror films known as the meta era, pertaining mostly to movies that really seemed to mock the genre. With it being overplayed as much as it did in a 10-year span, it became easy to mock it. And most people like to believe that it all started with Wes Craven's Scream in 1994, which really discussed the whole premise of horror movies. The whole thing is about the rules of surviving a horror movie while still including all the cliches and having some very nice scores and a killer known as Ghostface. However, I believe the meta era really started in 1992 with the third installment in the Evil Dead franchise, known as Army of Darkness, directed by Sam Raimi in 1992. And yes, that is the one where Ash, the dude with the chainsaw for a hand, goes back in time to the medieval era and claims he has a boomstick. Now, the meta era is a very weird thing because you can never really tell when it exactly began. Now, I believe that it grew popular when Army of Darkness came out, but it definitely showed through in the early 80s as well, with things like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, the first two Evil Deads, Leprechaun. Just this whole era is a mess, just thrown everywhere, and just wants to make fun of everything. Just have a quick laugh before they rip your heart out, literally, and drink the juices. Now, somewhat like how the classical era began, it's hard to tell when the meta era exactly ended. It's kind of like that drunk uncle at a family reunion that no one really knows, but everyone's just too nice to tell him to go away and stop kissing on grandma. And don't get me wrong, there are definitely some interesting things that have come out of the meta era as time has progressed, with 2011's Cabin in the Woods being an absolute cult hit. But the meta era really seems to have lost its luster with things like the Scary Movie franchise and all the parodies that come out that just sort of mock it, with that being its only intention and not having a little like horror fun like, say, Wes Craven's Scream used to do. Now, the final era to discuss is the modern era. Now, I'd like to say that this began with the new millennia in 2000 and has reached all the way to the present. This is kind of hard to discuss considering the fact that we haven't really had any sort of defining characteristic about us. We're kind of experimenting a lot with different things, such as the Saw franchise, The Purge, The Conjuring. There's all these different things, and we're trying to figure out what to do, what still scares people. We've become so desensitized, but we still come out with great things, such as Get Out, which teaches us to be afraid of the scariest thing in the world. White people. Now, this isn't to say the modern era has its fault. We've used a lot of CGI along with the reboots and sequels that a lot of other movies have been getting the treatment of. I mean, have you seen The Thing 2011 prequel? It's so bad. Just, come on, you hit it right the first time with the practical effects. Really? CGI? Now we've come to the answer portion. Now I just want to clarify that everything I say is of my own opinion. You're allowed to have your own opinion, even if it's wrong. Just kidding, just kidding. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions, but mine's more fun. Sorry. Let me know what you think in the comments below of what you think the best era of movies is. Now for my answer. I believe we are currently living in the greatest era of horror films. Now I know there are a lot of people already going down the comments like, you're stupid. Okay, I hear you, drunk 30-year-old child in the mother's basement. I hear you. But now, yes, the movie industry as of lately have been very lackluster, producing things that just seem to follow the norm with superhero films and sequels and reboots and all that sort of thing that, yes, sometimes even the horror genre is subject to it. However, it's safe to say that the horror genre has been a saving grace in the film industry. I mean, look at 2016, absolute crap of a year for films. However, we also got things like Lights Out and Don't Breathe, which are absolute masterpieces. And a lot of my favorite horror movies have come from this era, like Lights Out and the Saw franchise. Now, I know a lot of people like that, but I personally love it, and you should too! Now, even though I know I said this all personal opinion, I do have one little thing that kind of backs up my belief. Now, like I said, reboots have been a thing in the modern era of movies in general, but Friday the 13th seems to be a prime example of a horror movie from the 80s brought back for now. Now, most people pan this movie as being absolutely dreadful and just ruining all the love and mystique that happened in the original Friday the 13th movies. But really? Really, you're telling me that this movie is different from the films such as Jason takes a 5-minute stroll through Manhattan after a 2-hour boat ride? You're saying it's worse than that? You're saying it's different? Yes, it's different, but it's not. It's the same formula from the original Friday the 13th movies. Let's see. Masked, disfigured man murders teens who love nothing but sex, drugs, and really terrible hair metal. What's the difference? What's really the difference in all of this? It's the same formula, but it doesn't work. And that's why we're in a better era of horror films. We've realized that the things from the 80s don't work anymore. Things are product of their time. Freddy Krueger doesn't work now. Texas Chainsaw Massacre doesn't really work now. A lot of films don't work outside of when they were first created. And that's a simple fact. That's why reboots don't work, because we all remember them during that time when it could still work. If Ghostbusters were made today, not in the 80s, it probably wouldn't work because no one can really buy into it. It wouldn't work properly because it's a product of its time. And that's why we are in a better era of horror movies, because if you look at some of these films, they seem like they could work no matter where you're at. Lights Out, you're afraid of the dark. Everyone's been afraid of the dark for hundreds of years. Put that in the 80s, it worked. Put that now, it has worked. Put it whenever, it will most likely work. That's why I love modern horror movies. They just work now. You don't have to worry about them becoming outdated or losing their luster. It works no matter what. And that is why I believe we are in the greatest era of horror movies. Let me know what you guys saw in the comments below. What'd you think of the show? Do you want me to keep going? Tell me questions you'd like to hear me answer in the comments below. And don't forget, as always, time to subscribe. I've been Christian Michael Pierce, and I'm going offline. Ah!